Welcome, Dracuphiles, to Sundays with Dracula. Welcome to my house, enter freely and of your own will. This is chapter 18 of Sundays with Dracula. I am Edward G. Pettit of The Rosenbach in Philadelphia, the home of Bram Stoker's Notes for Dracula, over 100 pages of outlines, early plot ideas, and research notes compiled by the author over the 7 years he developed and wrote the book. It is an extraordinary record of the conception and development of a novel. We will definitely see something from Stoker's notes today. And joining me today as co-host is musician, Dracula collector, and creator of that song, our intro song, Tucker Christine. Hey, Tucker.
Hey, Ed, how you doing?
Good. You notice I played Ritual in the Blood Room today, as opposed to the usual Storm into Whitby. I know you've been, you posted a link to it and all. We have a link out there that Steve will put in the chat too for people to go to the web page and or the kind of all the choices you have for the web page to listen to and purchase that song and support the artist. Always a good thing to do is to support the artist. So that's a great song. That song, everyone, is the intro and outro song we use for Monday Drac Chat. So I thought it would be nice to throw that in here for our Sundays with Dracula show today. And people in the chat loved it. So
I just want to say that the B-side to that song is Decays of Facing Fingers, and that's my favorite thing I've ever written so far. So.
Whoa! All righty, that's great. All right, well, we'll have to get that on the show one of these days too. I can't wait to talk about this very important chapter in the book with you today.
I think this one's going to go long because I took a lot of notes on this one.
All right, well, I'm going to just go to you. Just talk, dude. I love it. Because that's what we do here on Sundays with Dracula. We illuminate, elucidate, explicate Bram Stoker's novel about bloodsuckers in the 1890s, one chapter at a time for 27 weeks. I have different co-hosts join me each week to create a kind of conversational annotation of the entire novel. And of course, Bram Stoker's Notes for Dracula are just one of the many gems at of the Rosenbach's collections. You can go online. You can see some of our collections guides, as well as gallery gateways of past exhibitions and other virtual programs and courses we're creating. There's a couple new courses up there posted now that you can check out. And we've also opening up the garden of the Rosenbach out behind the Rosenbach. There is a garden, and let me share this with you right now because I think it is available for. Are we sharing it? No, I don't see it. What do you see, Tucker? Do you see the Rosenbach?
I see the Rosenbach's page.
Great, that's what I want. So we have a garden there now. That I'm looking for the Rosenbach's garden, and you can go on and you can go. We have a garden out back, and we just had a gardener come in and plant and put flowers and plants in there that kind of go along with certain things in our collections. And it's opening on Thursday, September 17th. You could check back here soon for registration is what it says right now. You can't register to do it yet, but we're taking registrations so you can go, you'll be safe. You'll be in there with your own group of people for, I think, maybe around 45 minutes or something to look at them. And then you pull up your phone and then we have interpretive guides here to the garden. Like here's the Shakespeare one, and there's little passages from Shakespeare that allude to some of the plants and flowers that are in the garden. And we've attuned the gardens of books of faith and philosophy, William Shakespeare, Emily Dickinson, Alice Dunbar Nelson and Paul Laurence Dunbar, Lewis Carroll, and Marion Moore. So it's a lot of fun, and you can do that soon. So go to the rosenbach.org/garden and to learn more, and the registration will be up soon for everyone, and you can come visit the Rosenbach. I'll be happy to be back there myself running programs, but that won't be yet. So remember, if you're on the show today, if you're during the show today, if you're watching live on Zoom, use the chat, talk amongst yourselves. But if you have a question, please put it, or something that you want to direct towards me or Tucker, put it in the Q&A box, and then I am sure to see it. Are you drinking anything interesting today, Tucker?
I got one of your favorites, Ed. I got
Fortunato?
Fortunato's
Yeah.
Fate.
Oh, you're a
It's
dude. I love it.
I
That
would
is
put
so
that
good.
I would put that in the too good category. That could be dangerous.
You were at the opening party for that, weren't you? The kickoff party?
No, I was not.
Oh, you weren't. Okay, I'm trying to remember. So, that was from Art in the Age in Philadelphia, from New Liberty Distilleries that operates Art in the Age.
Yeah.
Looks like Elizabeth's going to jump on our cast. I think she's put in the wrong URL. Hey, Elizabeth, you're actually on. You actually use the panelist link. If you want to jump off and use the other link for the show, the registration link, then we won't have a box on our screen with your name. So, that Fortunato's Fate was delicious. It's a whiskey that is put into casks that held Amontillado. Am I correct?
Yes, you are.
The flavor, very sweet, very delicious.
Very
Small
bold.
batch. Did they ever do another batch, or are they still going off the first?
I think this bottle is actually second batch, but I could be wrong about that.
At first they did maybe like 1,000 bottles or something,
I know. I know. I went down there one time and they were out, and then I was able to get it again. So I don't know if they had it stored or if it's a second batch.
Delicious stuff. Well, in honor of the chapter this week, I have made a concoction which is my version of what will be in the chapter. So, and that is the burnt rum punch that Renfield mentions that Arthur's father, the first Lord Godalming, or that had or held the title then, had created for his client, invented this burnt rum punch. And I did it a little, well, I had to just come up with it. Like, first, what is burnt rum punch? And I was, researching that and going through all my cocktail books and trying to find references to it online. And I can't really find any 19th century references to burnt rum punch. There's a German drink. Adam had put a link in the Facebook group about a burnt rum punch that was, what's the German word for it? Fürsangenbowl. It means something like, fire rum or fire punch. And it is a traditional concoction that they do. And they take a sugar loaf, a little cone of sugar, and they pour rum on it and light it on fire, and it burns that way. That is not what I did, because I know a lot of the punch recipes called for lighting them on fire as you were preparing them to prep them. So that's what I did. And I took Charles Dickens's own recipe for punch, which I pulled out of my Convivial Dickens books. But there's a Drinking with Dickens by Cedric Dickens. There's all kinds of Dickens drinking books. And there he is over my shoulder here looking at us. Make sure I get it all right. He had a punch recipe that he left to posterity, which was dated 18 January 1847. And he loved punch and made punch all the time. The only thing I didn't add to it that Dickens definitely would have added is he would have added nutmeg. He loved nutmeg in his punch so much that he had a nutmeg grater, little pocket-sized nutmeg grater that he had in his pocket at all times. So whenever he was somewhere having a nice punch, he would be able to pull out his nutmeg grater and grate some nutmeg in it. But Dickens's recipe calls for juice and thinly peeled rind of 3 lemons, 2 good handfuls of lump sugar. There's a nice handy guide there. Like, okay, 2 good handfuls of lump sugar, 1 quart boiling water, 1 pint old rum, 1 or 2 large wine glasses of brandy. So not really, up on the, the exact amounts to use. So you're always kind of adapting and figuring it out. And then as you prep that, you put the spirits and the sugar and the rind, the lemon rinds, in a pan or a bowl, and you light it on fire, and then you stir it and you burn it for a few minutes. You want to make sure you use a high enough proof brandy or rum, so all the alcohol doesn't escape. And because I want alcohol in my punch, I don't want non-alcoholic punch.
Can always add more, Ed.
Yes, you can. So I adapted this recipe, and what I added, and I'm calling it, Lord Gadoming's Burnt Rum Punch. And I have put in it, I used brandy, and I did two kinds of rum. I did light rum and spiced rum. I used the Kraken, which I love. So brandy, light rum, spiced rum, sugar, lemon rind. I just, peeled a rind off of a lemon. And then I lit that on fire and stirred it around, and, maybe like 3 or 4 minutes on fire. And then I sliced oranges, and I put orange slices in it, and then heated that for a little while longer, and then I added port. And that was the last step. So I never boiled the port with it. I never cooked the port with it. I poured the punch concoction over the port. So this is my Lord Gadoming's burnt spice rum, or burnt rum punch. Sorry. It's really, really good. Likely it's not burning hot today, or I also fixed it cold and it didn't work. I didn't like it at all cold. So it's definitely a warm drink, and that's what we're doing today. So somebody mentions in the there is a in the Leonard Wolf, there was a rum punch recipe that he put in the annotated Dracula from Leonard Wolf, and I thought about using that, and then I thought, Dickens, I'm going to use Dickens as my base, so I always do that. Tell us about Ritual in the Blood Room, the song we played in the opening. I know you wrote it for the, so we'd have a new song to use on Monday Drac Chat. How did you put that one together? What were you thinking when you made that?
You had told me that you wanted it to sound like a Hammer theme meets Black Sabbath, and to me that triggered thoughts of King Crimson, really. Yeah. Because King Crimson sounds like Hammer meets Black Sabbath. I didn't have a long time. I mean, I could have given myself longer time, because you told me that you didn't need it right away, but you asked me on Friday, and your show was on Monday.
I know, and I was like, I understand you can't do this on a weekend. Like, I wasn't even asking. Like, I know you can't do it, but just so you know, I'm looking for a song, and you did it. You did it like 24 hours.
Yeah, I had you a rough cut in 24 hours, and then by Monday I had you a mastered version of it. I'm sure nobody else does this, but every time I listen to it, I hear every single mistake in it. But that one, I'm a little more forgiving in mistakes in that one because of how quickly I did it.
Well, it's a great tune. I love it. I get to listen to it like over and over for like, periods of my week, and I'm happy to play it tonight. And online, if people want to buy or listen to this, let me show the page here. They can go on to, they can go online and to this pleatedgazelle.fan link here, which I'll also put in the chat. And what can they do? And they can listen to it at places, but also buy it as well?
Yeah, all the streaming ones like Spotify and Deezer, you can just listen to it, put on a playlist, share it with your friends. The purchasing ones like iTunes and Bandcamp and my website, they're purchase sites. But however you want to do it.
Great. All righty.
If you go to pleatedgazelle.com, in the merch store, you can actually buy an enamel pin, and it comes with a free download. So
cool. All righty. Enamel. Oh, that's right. Yeah, I saw that online too.
I left them in my office at work, so I don't have any here to display. But
the Pleated Gazelle enamel pin, I will have to pick one of those up too. All right, everybody, support the artist. Now, you mentioned something else on Facebook that you actually went to the restaging of the Balderson Frankenstein play. So, and for everyone out there, Hamilton Dean adapts Dracula, and it's official. The Stoker estate, said okay to this in the 1920s, and Hamilton Dean writes a Dracula play, which becomes very popular in England. And then they bring it to America. But when they bring it to America, John Balderson comes in and does a kind of rewrite of Hamilton Dean's play. So the Dracula played on Broadway with Bela Lugosi, and then later in the 70s with Frank Langella and others, was the Hamilton Dean John Balderson play of Dracula. Balderson also did a Frankenstein, and tell the story of it, Tucker.
So technically, it was not a restaging; it was the premiere.
Mm-hmm.
So when Dean had the success with Dracula, he wanted to jump right at the next one. He chose Frankenstein, and he got Peggy Weebling to adapt it for him in England.
Yeah,
and
I've read that script, and that script was also used for the Universal movie too, the Peggy Weebling script. So they adapted it for the movie,
and they credit Balderson also in the movie too.
Didn't know that. Okay,
but it was rewritten after that also. So just like the Dracula play, Horace Liveright wanted to bring it over to America, and he got Balderson to adapt the adaptation for an American audience, and then he ran out of money before it got staged. So then it was never produced in the 30s, and it sat dormant, except for being used as the basis for the film. Mm-hmm. It lay dormant until 2002. There's an assisted living home in Newtown called Chandler Hall, and they have an auditorium, and they did like dinner theater, and they staged it there over Halloween weekend in 2002. And Jack Balderson was there, John Balderson's son.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he was a resident I don't know if he was a resident, that's why it was done there, or just they did it there and he came. I don't know. And the night that I went, David Skull was there doing a slide presentation about the history of Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason I went, really, was for Skull.
Yeah.
The play was not memorable at all.
You don't remember?
It was good,
or you just don't remember?
It was memorable in its disappointment. It was definitely a community theater version of it. I've
seen some great community theater.
Yeah, I've seen great high school theater too, but this was on the mid-level. It was, the acting wasn't great, the production was not, I mean, it was enjoyable, but the night itself was more enjoyable than the play.
Do you know if you can buy this play? Has it ever been made available?
To be honest with you, I don't know. I never really looked. I saw it and I didn't need to read it. You know? Uh-huh. It probably is. I mean, at least
that. I know the Weebling version is available, and there's like a scholarly book of Frankenstein adaptations. That's what I have it from. Hideous Progenies, I think it was called, and it's a book of all adaptations of Frankenstein. Is it? Yeah, I think it's like a history of adaptations, and then they include some, including the Peggy Weebling play, but I've never seen the Balderson version.
So over the years, I've actually seen quotes of Balderson bad-mouthing both the Weebling play and his own play, pretty much saying there was really not much I could have done with it.
Interesting. All righty. Well, I'm fascinated. I have to track it down now, so hopefully we'll get to do that.
It was a fun night, but not a great play.
A couple of questions come in. Ed, when do you plan to publish your Dracula-related cocktail book? You know, I would love to do that, but it's certainly not going to happen while I'm doing Sundays with Dracula. I am quite busy enough. That's Adrian. And although I want to do that. And Christine asks, am I growing my collection of tiki glasses behind me? Yeah, I have Frankenstein, the creature. I have Dracula, and then I have the creature from the Black Lagoon. So I got him recently too. So they're growing. They're growing.
I've got a Freddy hidden on the shelf somewhere behind me.
Just new? You mean you just got it?
No, it's okay. I've had it for a while, but it's up there somewhere.
Oh, and the tiki glass. You got the Freddy tiki glass. Yeah, I saw those. Yeah, so they have a great horror line. So all kinds of fun things to do, to buy, because I love buying this kind of stuff. Let's talk about the chapter. You ready? We got a lot to hit in this chapter.
It's a dense chapter.
It is. It's actually long. I mean, last week's chapter was It was actually short. I mean, it was shorter than short. Or actually, sorry, 2 chapters ago was short. The staking of Lucy was actually a short chapter because there's so much in it. And this chapter, well, when last we met, Jonathan in chapter 17, Jonathan's begun investigating the Count's whereabouts. Mina's organized the various journal entries, and still had to find time to console Seward and Arthur and Quincy, because that's what they, think that she is good at. But also I think chapter 17 was a chapter. Let me run this by you. A chapter about moving the plot along. They needed to get a couple characters into the mix of the other characters. We also needed this kind of emotional buffer after the staking of Lucy. So you couldn't have any strong plot element happen right after that chapter. And so far, Stoker's had 3 storylines running in this book, right? Jonathan and Mina storyline, the Lucy storyline, and then Lucy and Mina cross over a little. And the Seward and Renfield storyline and Seward and Lucy cross over a little. And Dracula's got a hand in all 3 of the stories, but has not, but the characters nor the book itself has made the connections to pull all of them together and get them all right there. So the characters from all the plots have to finally come together for this book. So while we're missing Van Helsing in chapter 17, and it's not until this chapter that he comes in, so now we have everyone together in the same house in the lunatic asylum, and that all the plot points come together, or that's now, but it began last chapter, and now the Van Helsing's the final element.
And I'm not 100% sure, but I think that chapter 17 is the most cut in the abridged version. I think the most comes out. It's something like, it's almost 1,000 words comes out of that chapter.
Yeah.
In the abridged version.
It doesn't surprise me, because you can just get the mention in the next one of Jonathan was tracking things down. I mean, you don't need those stories to really further this book along. But it's nice to have, especially if you're reading the whole thing, it's nice to have a break after Lucy before then you ramp up to the beginning of this, campaign against Dracula, which is what we're going to have here. So we have Seward's diary begins this chapter, and it is 30 September. And he gets home and he's found that, he's waiting for people, and Mrs. Harker gave us a cup of tea. Oh, that's great, right? Like, she not only has to organize everything, get all the things typed up and organized, she's got to console everybody. She also got to make the tea. So nice that she took the time to do that. And I love how Seward mentions this old house seemed like home. Like, it's a lunatic asylum.
It's got a woman in it now.
Yes, that's all a lunatic asylum needs. It's a woman, and then bang, it's like, it's home, isn't it? So, but it's also because of her relationship with him and how she's taking care of him. It's not just any woman. It's like she's like their mother. I mean, she's Jonathan's wife, but she's mothering the others. So that's really what makes it home. It's not just any old angel in the house, like the Victorian, ideal of having a woman around, but this woman is very maternal towards them and taking care of them. So the boys have a mom now. Stop me whenever you have notes and you want to talk. Okay. But Mina wants to right away. She says, I want to see your patient, Mr. Renfield. Go Mina, like, she's, let's do this. Let us, I need to connect with any pieces here that we think are important. And Seward in his own diary is, of course, very patronizing about it. She looks so appealing and so pretty that I could not refuse her. How about you couldn't refuse her because you said you wouldn't in the last chapter? You said you were going to share everything and you weren't going to hold anything back.
Well, that's flying out the window very shortly anyway.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
But there's so much sexism in this chapter. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. and she goes in to see Renfield, but and I love that how Renfield tidies up. Right? So just wait a minute till I tidy up this place. And his method of tidying was peculiar. He simply swallowed all the flies and spiders in the boxes before I could stop him. That's how Renfield tidies up before a lady enters his rooms. So quick, eat all the flies and spiders. And when she comes in, Seward's really careful. Like, I took care to stand where I could seize him at once if he attempted to make a spring at her. Like, heroic Seward here is gonna, stop Renfield from attacking her. I don't think that's a good plan. That's why you have attendants to, to do that. But she came into the room with an easy gracefulness, which would at once command the respect of any lunatic, he writes, which is patronizing and sexist in that, like, that she can, like, the woman, like, it's the Beauty and the Beast thing, like, that she has this power over him. But it's actually, there's an interesting thing going on in this chapter, and I'll hit it. Do I want to hit it now or in a little bit? That what Seward reads as her easiness is, as we'll see, Mina knows how to treat Renfield with respect. Like, Seward, like, it will interrupt him, right away and say things, and Mina doesn't do that, and she treats him with respect, and so Renfield, responds in kind. That her easiness, and I think also her easiness is her kind of her boldness, and as and bold for what especially what these men expect for a woman to be. That puts Renfield at ease. She comes in like an equal.
Because I think we always talk about Van Helsing and Dracula being two sides of the same coin, but I think for Renfield, Mina's the opposite side of the coin from Dracula. She definitely has some kind of sway over him that is, we'll see by the end of the chapter.
Yeah,
that evens out the sway that Dracula has, because he's trying to fight Dracula's sway for her.
That's a great point, and I definitely want to come back to that. But right away he tells her, don't stay. She says, my husband and I are staying in a visit, then don't stay. So he's warning immediately. And then he mentions, and then Seward interrupts, how did you know I wanted to marry anyone? And his reply, Renfield's reply, was simply contemptuous, given in a pause in which he turned his eyes from Mrs. Harker to me, instantly turning them back again. What an asinine question. I love how Renfield treats, Seward with no respect, but Seward doesn't treat him with any respect. And so he's just getting, and it's not an eye roll, but I can imagine there, it's easy to put an eye roll in there. He looks at Seward and he looks at Mina, and there's definitely an eye roll in there. What an asinine question.
You can totally picture this being the chapter where they decided that Tom Waits was going to play Renfield.
What a great Renfield he is. I love his Renfield in Coppola's Dracula. But Mina defends, or answers that one an asinine question. I mean, Seward sees it as defense, and this is where I see this. This is where I'm really kind of almost convinced that we're absolutely getting Seward's perspective on this scene, and I'm not sure it's accurate, and I'm not even sure Stoker wants us to believe that Seward's accurately describing. So Mrs. Harker at once championing me, he replied to her with as much courtesy and respect as he has shown contempt to me. I think it's just real easy for a reader to see that she's treating him with respect and he's responding in kind, and Seward's not, and he's getting, not respect and kind. So then for the rest of this, passage or section of that Seward's viewpoint, I can't help but it's just another reminder to me that Seward's not the most reliable narrator of his own asylum, and I don't think it's me reading from today back to then, like this is kind of a misreading by applying our values today on it. I think it's it seems almost obvious to me that Seward doesn't treat his lunatics well.
Oh, he certainly doesn't.
I mean, he does it by our standards. You have to think like, well, would someone in 1897 reading the novel think anything of it? Well, some would and some wouldn't. But I think enough of them would that Seward's not exactly the best asylum doctor.
I also don't think he understands insanity. There's parts in here with Renfield where he thinks he's getting over it just because he speaks eloquently. It's like he's speaking eloquently. He can't be crazy, right?
What does he call him right now? He calls him my own pet lunatic. He's talking, and then Seward's like, I positively opened my eyes at this new development. Here was my own pet lunatic, the most pronounced of his type that I had ever met with, talking elemental philosophy and with the manner of a polished gentleman. He's not really in tune with who his patients are and what they're capable of and what they can be and how to cure them. But also the my own pet lunatic line is precisely where Seward's attitude towards Renfield and I imagine his patients. And then Renfield addressed himself to the question with the impartiality of the completest sanity. And then here's what he has. Well, first he has this, life was positive. This is, I used to fancy that life was positive and perpetual entity, and that by consuming a multitude of live things, no matter how low in the scale of creation, one might indefinitely prolong life. This is a kind of vampire philosophy that he has, come up with that has, made him go mad or people think he's mad. And I find that interesting that Stoker is, maybe it answers why Renfield is immediately in tune with Dracula, that he already has this kind of vampire philosophy before Dracula visits, right?
Certainly.
And then he mentions "For the blood is the life" again. He uses that line, and I want to hit that. And then there's a reference to it afterwards that we'll hit too about the advertisement for that phrase. But for the blood is the life, I don't know how deeply we went into it the first time he said it in the past, but it's from Deuteronomy. It's 12:23. Deuteronomy, if you don't know, it's the laws in the Hebrew Bible. Deuteronomy itself is Greek for like second law. So this is the scripture with Moses giving out all the laws. You thought it was just the 10 Commandments? No. There's like a lot more. Or like in Mel Brooks, the Lord Jehovah has given unto you these 10 commandments for you all to obey. No, there's a whole other book of commandments that that we have for people. And one of those is 12:23, and it is, only be sure that thou eat not the blood, for the blood is the life, and thou mayest not eat the life with the flesh. So no rare steaks. And it makes sense for a diet for a culture that has not developed, technology enough to ensure that you're, cooking your meat long enough that, that it is safe to eat, that there won't be any diseases in it. But the idea behind it is that you shouldn't it's okay to have flesh, but the blood itself represents the life of that flesh, and that's not what you're supposed to be consuming, because food is for sustenance, not for taking the life of something. You just need to have it. But this is an interesting phrase, isn't it? Because it's a vampire story. I started reading it last night and then I fell asleep because it was like 4:30 in the morning, and But there's an Francis Marion Crawford short story called For the Blood is the Life. It's in a lot of vampire anthologies. It was published in 1905 in Collier's magazine, and the Christmas issue, because Christmas issues used to be all about scary stories. I love the ghost story at Christmas, and this Crawford story is called For the Blood is the Life, and it was also an advertisement. And I don't know if you have any info on this, but Adam posted on the Facebook group some pictures, and I had and then I did some research on my own for this, that this phrase For the Blood of the Life was a big advertising campaign. My computer's acting very slowly all of a sudden. There it is. Oh, jumped off. Oh, all right, I got an error code. I gotta wait. Let me try this one. Share. There we go. Can you see that? Did that share?
It just says you're sharing your screen. It doesn't. It's just a black screen. There you go.
There you go. And this is a bottle of it. It was Clark's world famous blood mixture. There's no blood in it. Don't worry. He wasn't actually marketing blood for people to drink. But it was for strengthening the blood is what it was for. And there's another one with the label, which is even better to show you. Here it is. And that's the tagline. The tagline he used was this, For the Blood is the Life. Clark's world-famed blood mixture, the great blood purifier and restorer. Can you see that?
I think that's the same one that Klinger has in his book.
Yeah, and Les Klinger put this in the annotated too. But here you can really read it. For cleansing and clearing the blood from all impurities. It cannot be too highly recommended for scrofula, scurvy, skin and blood diseases, and sores of all kinds. It is a never-failing and permanent cure. So it cures everything. It cures cancerous ulcers. And it was huge, and it made Clark rich. This thing that he put out there, and it is absolute bunk. There's there's nothing in it that would help you. It is I found online that the British Medical Association analyzed Clark's product in 1909 and revealed that the contents were mainly water, a little sugar, a minuscule amount of alcohol, and traces of chloroform and ammonia. So it just made it up, and people took it for all kinds of things. And there's a big history of these kind of quack medicines throughout history, and the 19th century. They're really big, especially in advertising. And Clark made a fortune. And that was on everybody.
It still happens.
If you said For the Blood is the Life, apparently people then thought of Clark's, blood mixture. That was what you thought of. That it become that prevalent, that it was a catchy line for that. So I can imagine that. Well, and we know that Stoker is aware of it, right? Because in this chapter, Renfield right away says the vendor of a certain nostrum has vulgarized the truism to the very point of contempt. So he is, and that's what he is referring to, that everybody knows For the Blood is the Life in this time, not from the Bible, but from this, quack medicine that was out on the market. And Francis Marion Crawford used it for a story in 1905, and I imagine that's where he first heard the phrase too, is from there, and not necessarily from the Bible. And it's so appropriate. It's For the Blood is the Life is so, you're writing a vampire story, and there's your tagline. So there needs to be a vampire story where a vampire takes over the company from Clark and to produce blood mixture, and maybe he's putting blood in it, so vampire blood, and all this Renfield is speaking here with Mina just fascinates Seward, and he can't, hard to imagine that I had seen him eat up his spiders and flies not 5 minutes before. Like, he can't comprehend how his patient is suddenly becoming sane before his eyes, as soon as someone treats him with respect. And then here's the warning that we get. Goodbye. Well, it's a kind of a warning, indirect warning. Goodbye, my dear. I pray God I may never see your sweet face again. May He bless and keep you. Which is a bit of an indirect warning. Like, I hope you're not around, because he knows something's up. I have a couple questions here. Nicholas wants us to talk more about the relationship between Dracula and Renfield. Are there any clues in the text why those two have a connection? Well, we'll see that, and that story certainly develops now over the next few chapters. We've seen it early on that Renfield is in tune with when Dracula is there. So we know there's a psychic connection between the two. And the big question is, how did they get that connection to begin with? And I don't know if there's any evidence. Yeah, he knows he's coming, right? He knows that Dracula is coming before he arrives at Carfax.
Yeah, he feels it. The one chapter where I was on, we were discussing how there's the parallels in developing between Renfield and Lucy, and it's like Dracula has like feelers out, like psychic feelers out for weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And that's what that one chapter feels like, is like he's just looking for the weakest people to latch onto, and Renfield's like the perfect candidate.
Yeah. I also think too that, well, he's a perfect candidate because he already has this vampire philosophy. Like how does Dracula not find that person if he's putting out maybe psychic feelers? But Stoker doesn't explain it. There's no concrete, like, this is how Renfield gets, in Dracula's sights or connected with him psychically even before he arrives at Carfax. Stoker doesn't explain it. Movies often, like Renfield, the Coppola movie, Renfield actually went before Harker to visit Dracula. In the 31 Todd Brown and Lugosi film, it's not Harker that goes, it's Renfield that goes to Transylvania to first meet Dracula, and these trips drive him insane. So the fact that movies do that is a kind of tacit admission that we need to make some kind of connection. We can't just have it by chance, that Renfield seems like, people will ask this question, as Nicholas just did, and we've all asked this question: how are they together? And this is, I think, this vampire philosophy is I think the closest we get to why Renfield would be connected to Dracula, because he already was practicing in his madness this kind of vampire philosophy where he was consuming lives to, he says, lengthen his own life, right? It's not exactly that. It's the indefinitely prolong life. So it's he thinks he can be immortal by consuming lives.
I think their willingness to make that change in the movie adaptations also reflects on people are more willing to draw their own conclusions when they're reading than when they're watching a movie for some reason. So they kind of have to do that for a movie, whereas Stoker just, you figure it out,
Yeah. Well, we also don't like coincidences as much. Coincidence for people to know each other is and to interact with each other is not considered real, or a realist approach to art, when coincidences happen all the time, every day. You just happen to, and I just ran into you, you're a stranger, and it turns out, you're my cousin that I didn't know about. I mean, those kind of things happen all the time, but we think that they don't. we don't recognize how much chance happens in life. The and the 19th century, and it was just a regular feature of before the 19th century, but through the 19th century, it's a regular feature in fiction to have, just coincidental encounters have deep meaning. Dickens used to relate all his characters in some way in his novels, and for me, it's almost like a philosophy of life. It's like one of the things that I'm demonstrating in this book is that we are all connected in some way. But there's no direct answer in the text. It's one we have to figure out for ourselves. Adrian writes also that there's also been a very interesting novel previous to Dracula that made a link between vampire and religious references, and that is Lilith by George MacDonald, which I have not read. I've read actually MacDonald's other works that he was writing for children, The Princess and the Goblin, and those kind of books. It's those fantasy novels that came to help shape what fantasy becomes in the 20th century, because Tolkien loved MacDonald and C.S. Lewis loved MacDonald, so they kind of adopt those ways of telling fantasy stories. But MacDonald did write Lilith for adults, and I've never read it. And is it a vampire story? Do you know?
I haven't read it. No, I don't know.
So I didn't even recognize that it's actually a vampire story, even though I understand the Lilith connection with vampires. But I've never read it. So thanks for saying that, because now I want to read it even more.
Adrian's always throwing stuff out there that makes me want to read more.
I know. So the Van Helsing arrives, and he's back. I come here to stay, if need be. All affairs are settled with me, and I have much to tell. More kind of hints, right? Hints at like what Van Helsing does when he's not there. I know that, part of it is literally just settling his life events because he lives in Amsterdam and he has to settle there. But he's always, but I don't know. It seems more. I mean, and maybe it's settling his wife, because she's, probably in an asylum somewhere or under someone's care, or his investigations and research into, vampire lore, which we'll get in this chapter. And then he has this great compliment about Mina, right?
That's such a compliment.
The backhanded compliment, the sexist compliment. That wonderful Madam Mina, she has man's brain, a brain that a man should have, where he much gifted, and a woman's heart. God fashioned her for a purpose. Yeah, to take care of you boys.
So he kind of extends it even further, going, it's like the best of the best man's brain.
And let me tell you, if she had a man's brain, she'd be sitting around lamenting their fate and crying and breaking down like all the men are doing. Van Helsing's the only one that doesn't break down. That's because every now and then he explodes into hysterical laughter. So when King Laugh comes and visits him. So let me tell you, you need to be grateful, Van Helsing, that she doesn't have a man's brain, because none of this stuff would have gotten organized and ready to go without her. And then he's doing Mina, last chapter, Mina and Seward have a pact. We're going to share everything. We're not going to hold back. We need to be honest. That's the way to do this. As soon as Van Helsing comes on the scene, though, it is after tonight, she must not have to do with this so terrible affair. It is not good that she run a risk so great. We men are determined, nay, are we not pledged to destroy this monster? But it is no part for a woman. Even if she be not harmed, her heart may fail her in so much and so many horrors, and hereafter she may suffer, both in waking from her nerves and in sleep from her dreams. Oh, like Jonathan did, maybe? I think he survived now, right? Like Jonathan was completely destroyed by his experiences.
Yeah, but she may want to have children. That could affect it.
She is a young woman and not so long married. So there may be other things to think of sometime, if not now. Like, it's, it is the worst plan. And I just, did original readers read this and also like me? Because I think, again, like about Seward, they just must have said, no, like, it's just so obvious that she's capable. And that then they're going to shut her out. But he goes, that's a long explanation, as if he thinks Seward needs some convincing, that Van Helsing wants to make sure that the men exclude Mina. So, and here's all the reasons why we need to exclude her.
But then Seward does go right along with it. He's like,
he
sure.
does. He just caves immediately. And even before that, he says, but he's talking about that Dracula lived next door, and they just discovered this, and the Carfax was Dracula. Oh, that we had known it before, he said. This is Van Helsing. For then we might have reached him in time to save poor Lucy. However, the milk that is spilt cries not afterwards, as you say. So first of all, that trite cliche about Lucy's death is so completely not only inappropriate, but really callous. But what are you justifying the fact that you failed to save Lucy? You failed to save Lucy, not because you didn't know that Dracula lived in Carfax, but you failed to save Lucy because you kept leaving her alone and thinking that your plans were enough to keep him out. What a justification. I really dislike him. I'll love Van Helsing later in this chapter. I really dislike him now. The way that the triteness, but though he's crying over spilt milk, Lucy's dead. And it's your fault. And don't say that, if we'd only known this sooner. It's your fault. So Mina, wouldn't have happened with Mina. Mina would have saved her, right? Mina would have sat up with her, wouldn't have left her side, bat at the window. Mina would have ran and gotten somebody to take care of the bat. So Mina would have taken care of it. All righty. Enough ranting against Van Helsing and Seward. Sorry. So I do like them at times in the book. Even Seward, I do like it sometimes in the book, but they drive me crazy with this, attitude. So, all right, now we're at Mina's journal, and this is interesting because this is the first. Well, it's Mina Harker in the text. It's Mina Harker's journal, 30 September. I just learned this in the. Do you know that in the?
Yeah, in the typescript. This section was originally titled Mina's Campaign Diary, or actually Campaign Diary kept by Mina Harker.
I know. I love that. Like, that was a great idea. I wish
apparently, from what I've seen, apparently it was going back and forth between Campaign Journal and Mina's private diary.
Yeah. But to think that Mina at this time would have thought, we're on a campaign to hunt down Dracula. It's a campaign. It's like a military campaign. And that would have been cool. So, but he didn't. It's just Mina Harker's journal. Or the editor then said, not the editor of Stoker's book, but the editor of this book, how these papers are putting together, said, no, we're just going to call it Mina Harker's journal.
So everything says that's the only instance of it in the manuscript, and I'm wondering if it was a leftover. Maybe at one point did he have the whole ending being the campaign journal, and then he figured he needed more points of view. It's something we'll never know, but it's
there's other instances here that there's that we'll hit in a little bit too, that it's almost, I'm just almost certain there were other drafts of this novel that were lost once it hit the typescript, because so many clues. You don't put clues about things that you never wrote, and then cut them out later. You wrote them, and then they continue with references. That's why the references are there, because you've already written it. But the campaign diary, I like a lot. But they, excuse me, they unconsciously formed a sort of board or committee. Professor Van Helsing took the head of the table. I like this Victorian, like, there's a social problem right now. Let's form a committee to solve it. This is a very Victorian solution. I think we still do it, you know, in politics and government. But there's a problem, and they need to form a committee. So they just do it unconsciously, form a committee to solve the issue of vampires in London. They fall right back on their usual societal roles too. With Van Helsing at the head, and of course he asked me to sit next to him on his right. Ooh, whoa, he's really including you, and asked me to act as secretary. So he's, you know, this is the societal role you will play as a woman. You'll be secretary, and it works. She could type, she can organize. We all recognize that, you know, the role of a secretary is actually a super strong one in keeping everything, you know, running and making sure everything gets done. And Mina can do that. That is a good skill that she has. She also has other skills that they're ignoring. And Anastasia notes that it was clerks and secretaries were a male profession in the 19th century. So, especially on a committee. I mean, no woman's going to be allowed on a committee to solve this, unless maybe it's dealing with women's issues. And then you can allow some rich women on the committee to help you solve the problem. But it's still going to be, you know, mostly headed by men. But yeah, the whole profession is, and typewriters, when, you know, and when typewriters first come out, it's men who are jumping on them to like, oh my gosh, this is great, you know, for us to use, you know, to be secretaries. And women recognize that they could make some inroads and take over, you know, the typewriter profession. And then maybe that's why women wind up in secretarial roles to begin with, because they are so strong in taking over the whole typewriting profession that happens in the late 19th century. But I'm speculating. So that's what I do in life anyway, right? I just speculate about it. I didn't live then. I like to think that I lived then, but I'm only here because I've gotten in the TARDIS and, you know, made my way to here to do this, but I'm actually not from this time. But she's a secretary and they all have their role. They're all around the table, and here we go. This is the lecture that Van Helsing's been waiting to deliver since this. He keeps hinting at it, asking his questions, and he's going to get to deliver it, and he does, and he starts it with that great, "There are such beings as vampires," which is a great way to start this lecture. Let me read this paragraph, and then we'll go in and we'll talk about all the things in it. "There are such beings as vampires. Some of us have evidence that they exist. Even had we not the proof of our own unhappy experience, the teachings and the records of the past give proof enough for sane peoples. I admit that at first I was skeptic. Were it not that through long years I have trained myself to keep an open mind, I could not have believed until such time as that fact thunder on my ear. See, I prove. Alas, had I known at the first what now I know, nay, had I even guessed at him, one so precious life had been spared to many of us who did love her. But that is gone, and we must so work that other poor souls perish not, whilst we can save. The Nosferatu do not die like the bee when he sting once. He is only stronger, and being stronger, have yet more power to work evil. This vampire which is amongst us is of himself so strong as in person as 20 men. He is of cunning more than mortal, for his cunning be the growth of ages. He hath still the aids of necromancy, which is, as his etymology imply, the divination by the dead, and all the dead that he can come nigh to are for him to command. He is brute, and more than brute. He is devil in callous, and the heart of him is not. He can, within limitations, appear at will when and where and in any of the forms that are to him. He can, within his range, direct the elements, the storm, the fog, the thunder. He can command all the meaner things, the rat and the owl and the bat, the moth and the fox and the wolf. He can grow and become small, and he can at times vanish and come unknown. How then are we to begin our strike to destroy him? How shall we find his where? And having found it, how can we destroy? My friends, this is much. It is a terrible task that we undertake, and there may be consequences to make the brave shudder. For if we fail in this our fight, he must surely win, and then where end we? Life is nothing's, I heed him not, but to fail here is not mere life or death, it is that we become as him, that we henceforward become foul things of the night like him, without heart or conscience, preying on the bodies and the souls of those we love best. To us forever are the gates of heaven shut, for who shall open them to us again? We go on for all times, abhorred by all, a blot on the face of God's sunshine, an arrow in the side of him who died for man. But we are face to face with duty, and in such case, must we shrink? For me, I say no. But then I am old, and life with his sunshine, his fair places, his song of birds, his music and his love lie far behind. You others are young. Some have seen sorrow, but there are fair days yet in store. What say you? So I think it's important to read the whole thing, just because that's one of the key chapters, passages of the book.
Yes, it is.
We learn all about vampires. And I like how it becomes this, it is a lecture, and then it becomes a sermon, and then a plea, and then a clarion call, and then it's got this nice rhythm to it that he goes through, and it's easy to see why he's the leader of the group, through something like this. Before we get into it, let's take a quick mid-break, and for me to tell you about some things. Our Dracula Club membership deal has closed. Thanks to everyone who joined. There will be, a couple people mentioned about membership cards. Membership cards will go out. Sorry for the delay, but the person who tends to them, who sends them out to everyone, is only on every other week at the Rosenbach, because we have a week on, week off for the people that go into the building. But they will go out. You will receive them. And so don't worry. And thank you all for joining the Dracula Club. Tomorrow night, tune in for 1 hour of Monday Drac Chat at 6:30 EDT. Each week, one of our Dracuphile audience members will join me to talk about all the fabulous ideas and topics that you raise in the chat from today's show, and maybe a couple leftover topics from me. Tomorrow's Dracuphile joining me will be Carrie Millsap Spears, who unfortunately couldn't make last week. She had an emergency, she couldn't come. And a big thank you to Anastasia Klimchinskaya, who's also in the audience today, who admirably filled in last week. Thanks so much, Anastasia. I look forward to adding even more Dracula talk to my life tomorrow night with Carrie, and I hope you'll join in. Remember to watch Monday Drac Chat. You need to register for the Zoom link. It's not the same link for Sundays with Dracula. Monday Drac Chat is for Rosenbach and Dracula Club members only. There is no live Facebook stream of it, nor posting of it online afterwards. You can only watch it live on Zoom as a benefit for being a member of the Rosenbach or the Dracula Club. We have some special guests coming up on Sundays with Dracula. At the end of the month, Kim Newman, author of Anno Dracula, will be joining us at the end of the month on September 27th for chapter 21, which is very significant because that's the chapter of Dracula from which Newman's Anno Dracula diverges from Stoker's plot. And I have very good news. I did hear from Mark Gatiss about a date. Mark Gatiss, if there's some people who don't know, he's one of the creators of this year's BBC Dracula adaptation. Mark wrote the show, the Dracula show, with his Sherlock partner, Stephen Moffat. They also did the Cumberbatch Freeman Sherlock series. And Mark also plays Renfield in the new Dracula. He's also written for and acted in episodes of Doctor Who. He's created some great horror film documentaries, History of Horror, Horror Europa, the new In Search of Dracula. He's resurrected the M.R. James Ghost Story for Christmas on the BBC, which I love. And you can also hear him as Dracula in the audio dramatization of Stoker's Dracula that he did for Big Finish back in 2016, which he plays Dracula. And there was very recently, Big Finish did a prequel called Dracula's Guests, and a sequel a sequel to Dracula in which Dracula gets resurrected in World War I. And Mark Gatiss plays Dracula in all three of these. Have you gotten to listen to those yet?
I haven't.
I just listened to the prequel. I've heard the Dracula. It's very good, and the prequel Dracula's Guest I just listened to, and I just began the Dracula's War is the new one. So they're very good. They're available for Big Finish online. But this is all to say we have a date for Mark Gatiss program. But I can't tell you yet today because we haven't confirmed the time. So just in case something goes wrong and then the time doesn't work, I have to confirm the time, then I can give you the date. I can tell you that Mark will not be on this show. He won't be on Sundays with Dracula. Instead, we're going to have a special program with him on a different day that will be a Q&A session with him that I'll talk to him. We'll field questions just like I did with David Scull. And as soon as I confirm the time, we'll make the announcement. I mean, it could be this week. I could let us know. But I can tell you that it's probably the end of the month. So it'll be a quick turnaround between this is when he's going to be on. We're going to have this program and it's going to be a quick turnaround. So very soon, I promise. Back to the show and this very, dense, so much information in this paragraph here from Helsing's lecture, sermon, plea, clarion call. What do you have for this?
Well, first of all, I like that Van Helsing claims that he was a skeptic. Van Helsing knew that.
At one point, you didn't believe in something?
For a second there, I didn't think this was happening, but
yeah, it's but his definition of skeptic is not our definition. His definition of open mind is not our definition of open mind.
He's actually later on in the chapter, he's got one of my favorite lines. We'll get to it soon.
But here he's defining the vampire, right?
Yeah.
He gives us the Nosferatu term. The Nosferatu, he die not like the bee when he sting one. So when the vampire attacks, he doesn't die. Well, I don't think you need to tell me that, but anyway, it's his chance to do a little metaphor, which Van Helsing loves. He's as strong as 20 men, so has super strength, and his cunning be the growth of ages. He has the aids of necromancy, so we don't necessarily see that he can command the dead. That doesn't really happen in this book, does it?
No, not really. I think
he has the undead in this book. We know that, but
yeah, that's where I was headed. But yeah, they kind of Van Helsing kind of hints that he has control over Lucy, but that's about the extent of it.
And I think we have to realize too that not everything that Van Helsing says comes true. And a little later in the next speech, he talks about all we have is superstition and tradition to rely on for this stuff. And I think Stoker has kind of given his characters an out, or Van Helsing especially, by saying like, well, he's just kind of studying, tradition and superstitions. Like maybe it's not all 100% accurate. This is just what he's found out. He can control the weather. Well, we've seen that. He can command the meaner things, animals. We'll see it soon with rats, but with the wolf too. He can grow and become small and vanish and come unknown. More of that in the next paragraph. But I love this. There may be consequence to make the brave shudder. He tells them that this is super dangerous for us to do this. Is the shadow in this, or doesn't throw shadow? That's in the next one.
That's coming up.
Yeah. But there's a bonding moment here that happens too, right after this speech. Like the big peril is that we could all become vampires and then we're shut out from heaven forever.
Yeah, and he also mentions the folklore where he says how you'll have to come back and prey on your loved ones.
Yeah, which is usually the way vampires attack in folklore is they almost always just return to their village and family and attack. It's not going out and finding strangers, someone that didn't know them in life. And because Lucy doesn't do that. I mean, she winds up because they go to her. And that's interesting that, Lucy did not then visit Arthur immediately as a vampire. She's out on the heath catching children, strangers. But that is a element of folklore. Excuse me, I need to pour some more Rum Punch. I have no hot plate up here. I usually have an ice bucket here for my cocktails, but I don't have anything hot. The only thing I have to keep it hot is this handy, cute cat towel here, which I drape over to try to keep some of the heat in. But I don't want it hot. I just want it still warm.
Should have got a thermos.
That doesn't look cool. Pouring from a thermos is pouring from a pot, and then a little cute cat towel to cover it. This Gadoming's burnt rum punch I like better and better as it goes on here. So I will put the way I made it, the recipe that I used, on the Facebook group for everybody to try it yourselves. There's a little bonding moment that happens here, which I like right after that first speech. Because this is Mina's diary. Whilst he was speaking, Jonathan had taken my hand. I feared oh so much that the appalling nature of our danger was overcoming him when I saw his hand stretch out, but it was life to me to feel its touch. So strong, so self-reliant, so resolute. A brave man's hand can speak for itself. It does not even need a woman's love to hear its music. All right, maybe she gets a little sexist in the end there, but it's, but it's a nice moment between the two of them, and it's more of this kind of, reclamation of Jonathan that has been going on since last chapter, that he is becoming the hero that he needs to be to defeat Dracula. And Mina can see that in him, which is a very good thing. And then they have this like ritual, right? He puts the professor puts the crucifix his golden crucifix on the table, and they all hold hands, and our solemn compact was made. But they do it in a very, ritualistic way, the solemn ritual around the crucifix, that they're all in it for the fight. This is their campaign. And now we get another little speech here, which is it's a mixture of vampire powers and and limitations. Yeah. This is where I'll share a bit. We'll go through and talk about it a little bit, but here's where I want to share the the notes that Stoker took from Emily Gerard, and is good. Oh, Lockie's in the Lockie's in the chat today too. I think I may have a question or two to ask Lockie in the chat. Hey Lockie, I'm going to ask you some questions. Because he really knows this Emily Gerard Stoker stuff well. But he goes on. First, he says that this is interesting. A power denied to the vampire kind. We have on our side something that is denied the vampire. We have sources of science, and we are free to act and think. And the hours of the day and night are ours equally. And we also have self-devotion and a cause. So he's kind of like, we have these advantages. And I love that one of those advantages is science and technology, which is what they consistently use throughout this novel to combat Dracula. But then we get into the traditions and superstitions. These things are, and he says, these things are everything. They're everything because that's all I got, right? I mean, they like, how do you, there's no book, there's no treatise that, that scientifically proven that contains all the vampire information for them. So they just have to rely on this stuff. And then so he talks about vampires generally. They're all over the world. Every culture has them. Greece and Rome and Germany and China, and everybody's got these, vampire traditions. The vampire live on and cannot die by mere passing of the time. He can flourish when that he can fatten on the blood of the living. I love it. It's like scriptural language he's using here. He can fatten on the blood of the living. He can even grow younger. And then he says at one point, he throws no shadow. He make in the mirror no reflect. And there was do you have that difference in the drafts too, in the type written for the throws no shadow? He had another thing that he had added there, and it was
about.
Oh yeah, he throws no shadow, and he had written in the typescript. Stoker had written, you friend John saw that when he meet you on the road here. Alas, that you did not know of him then. So Seward, in an earlier version, met Dracula probably as his neighbor, and he had actually written that scene. And we've seen this in the notes that I've been sharing for the last few weeks, that Stoker originally had Dracula meet the people in this group, that there was some kind of socialization, that he was coming to the asylum, that he was interacting with people. They all knew him, and then it's not until Jonathan sees him and says, oh my gosh, you're Count Dracula, I know who you are. So
I would love to see how it was that Seward noticed that there was no shadow.
Well, it's obviously daytime. And we know that, like, Dracula can come out in the day. He just doesn't have powers in the day. Like, that's why their advantage that they have night and day to work against him, because when they're working against him in the day, he can't do all this stuff, except noon and sunset, right? Like, there are exceptions to when he has this power to transform. He can transform himself into a wolf, a bat. He can come in mist. This is interesting though, because he says, and I was confusing these two, right? Because he says he can come in mist, and from what we know, the distance he can make this mist is limited, and it can only be around himself. So it's like, it's not that he becomes a mist. He creates a mist that he can then come in, and you can't see him because the mist is concealing him. And then also, he can come on moonlight rays as elemental dust. And that's what we've seen.
Yeah,
we've seen the vampire women do that in his castle, and we saw Dracula do that with Lucy when he visited her. So that's not a mist. That's some kind of elemental dust that he can turn into. But this really begs the question now, like, how the hell do you know, like Van Helsing? And I think it's okay to say he's got all this stuff from tradition and superstition, but he's still learning too, just as we're learning as readers as to what's going on with vampires.
I also like, in at least one sentence back here where he's saying all the places the vampire has been, he's hitting all the same places that Dracula mentioned in his bloodline. He's like, he was the devil begotten Hun, he was with the berserker, the berserker Icelander, and the Slav and the Magyar, and Dracula mentioned all those when he was laying out his bloodline.
Hey Lockie, I'm saying if you want to be a panelist, because I want to share some pages here. Can you hear me, Lockie?
I hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, definitely.
Okay, great.
I want to share some of the notes with you, with the Stoker's notes. I'm totally putting you on the spot here. I didn't ask you ahead of time for this, but there you are. Beautiful. Thank you. Because especially in the Emily Gerard, or in the book here, the photo that they use of Emily Gerard is credited to you, that you shared with Elizabeth Miller and Robert Basang when they put this together.
That's correct. Yes.
So I thought, oh, I've got to ask, and I know you've done all the Emily Gerard research and all this stuff, and so Tucker, I just thought of this morning, like, oh my gosh, I should just, like, if Lockie's on the show, and you haven't met Tucker yet. Tucker, this is Lockie.
Hi, Lockie.
Hi.
But in the notes, he really relies on, there are written notes, right, from from the 19th century. The article was in 19th Century Magazine, Transylvanian Superstitions, and we have those notes, and they're part of the Bram Stoker's notes. But he didn't. And then she took that chapter, and then she kind of, adapted it into the book-length subject about Transylvania that she was writing, The Land Beyond the Forest. But you also know that we're certain that Stoker actually read that book as well, not just the magazine. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And what happened is I spent years trying to answer this question, and I wrote an article for the ICFA, the International Conference in the Fantastic and the Arts. And I spent an entire page talking about whether he had seen the book, and it centered on about naming the rose, because that's not in the 19th century. We know that he saw that, the 19th century, because he took direct notes from that. So I came down with...
Here's the first page of that. It says up top here, Transylvanian Superstitions, by Gerard. He gives her their married name here, which I don't know.
Lashowska, yeah.
Lashowska Gerard, 19th Century Magazine, July 1885. And then, he's taking notes from this. And mostly it's the superstition stuff that he's taking. There's a little bit of vampire lore that he does, but this is got the evil spirit of noon and the Romanian names for them here, which I won't mispronounce. Here he's got the night before Easter Sunday, witches and demons are abroad, and hidden treasures then flame. And we see that he uses that detail. And this is the stuff that he's getting from this article, right? The St. George's Day treasures. But this is all from the Transylvanian Superstitions article. And so how does he know the book that she then writes, Land Beyond the Forest?
Well, that's it. So he introduces one extra element that's not in the article, the magazine, and that's the comment about the rose. So with that one comment, so when I wrote the article, I'll get a copy of that and get it to everybody who's listening. That shouldn't be too hard. And from that one article, I said either he had access to the book or he heard it from some other common source. After a couple of years after I published that with the Journal of the Fantastic and the Arts, it came out that someone found an interview, a wonderful interview with Stoker, although it's way too short, where he mentions her by name and says that she had written a book. So we know that he had access to that book. And then, was it last summer or was it 1,000 years ago? I was in London, and I had a chance to go over some of the material and found that he had annotated that book. And so that was fairly conclusive proof.
The detail you're talking about is the branch, which is in this paragraph here, the branch of wild rose on his coffin, keep him that he move not from it. And also the sacred bullet fired into the coffin, kill him so that he be true dead. Is that in the article, or is that only in the... I don't remember that part. I remember the rose part. Yeah.
But I don't remember the bullet.
I think the bullet might be in the book too. Do you remember, Tucker, if it's in the article and book? So but at least with the wild rose, we know that information is in the book, not just in the article. So
so there's two things I'll try and get to the group. One would be the article I wrote, and when you read that, you'll read more about him, know more about Gerard than most people on the planet. And then the subsequent interview that came out, I mean, he gave it. It was just around, but nobody found it until about 6-7 years ago or more. Anyway, and in the interview, he gives her credit and talks about her briefly, and then moves on to things that we don't care about. But I'll get a link to that because it really sort of spells in what's going on. And then we found out just a few years ago that he accessed a lot of these texts from the London Library.
London Library, yeah.
And all the time we always thought he was coming to the more famous library part of the British Museum, but it turns out that he went to the more, it was there all the time waiting for us. We just didn't realize.
You yourself looked at that Land Beyond the Forest book, and the notations in that look just like the notations he made in other books, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, he didn't doodle and put his, he didn't draw funny figures on the margins. But what he did,
Bram and Emily, he didn't do that, like, you know, or like he was doing with Dracula almost in his notes.
he didn't write down Abraham was here, you know,
Yeah.
1895. But he did. When you look at the books that he referenced, what you see is he pencil underlined, and he did it very carefully. I mean, this was a man who was a close reader, and it inspires you to understand how carefully he read the topic, and you know, he underlined areas that don't get talked about in the book, but the area where he talks about vampires is the one that is the most dog-eared and has a lot of underlines. So that all matches, you know, Stoker's comments on this.
I'm going to share one more page because it's got my favorite, and he mentions this then about the Scholemans, or the Scholemans.
Yeah.
And this is from Emily Girard, and it's up the top here. I'll make it bigger and make it easier to read. Scholemans, school in, so hard to read this writing. School in mountains where devil teaches mysteries of nature. Only 10 pupils a time, and D retains one as payment. So, but he'll also use that here. Well, you know, that Stoker uses that here, and that the this is information that he's gotten from his friend Arminius, who may have been a real person. We think that it could be this one scholar that we know, but who has made this record, and that they learned his secrets in the Scholemans among the mountains over Lake Hermanstadt. They learned his secrets, meaning the secrets of, well, is it the secrets of the evil one, or it gets confusing here. Have you gone through this part of the thing, Lockie?
I do have I have a strong opinion after looking at this intensely for way more time I'd like to admit. I don't think Stoker ever needed to fully form this. I think, but I think there's an implication that Dracula was part of the Scholemans, and perhaps he was one of the disciples that the devil kept afterward. Yeah. And he accessed his vampirism by means other than the traditional route, which perhaps gave him more powers, more control. And I mean, the more I look at that, the more conviction I had that Stoker had at least had thought of that, or had that in mind as he went through the offer. You know, it just it all makes sense to me when you throw all that in, was that there was some kind of element of Scholemans to Dracula's background. And we're free to conjecture. I mean, the text doesn't come down on that, but that's my reading of it.
And this isn't expanded much in The Land Beyond the Forest, is it? It's still just these small details, right?
Yeah, so the text ends up, and I'd kind of forgotten a chunk of this because I had to go back over it, but this was, what we see in Girard's work is more or less a recopying of a man named Schmidt, who was in the same town that she was in roughly the same time as a teacher. And so one of the things now for me to explore further is their connection between the two. She either knew him, or you know, it would have been obvious that his textbooks about that area were quite there, because she would go to the library there, and there they were. So it looks to me like she actually copied that part of, so we can blame Schmidt on the Nosferatu spelling, because she nails the spelling correctly. You know, she's Schmidt and she give the same way to spell it, and he does. You know, his work is before hers. So I think that is a very strong evidence that she took it from him, because then she also copies down all the things he mentions, and he got there first. So we can blame Schmidt on the Nosferatu.
On Nosferatu, and why that is a term for vampires. Great. All right, Lockie, I'm going to throw you back into attendee. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
I appreciate your expertise.
So that interview that he mentioned is included in the Stoker on Stoker.
Oh, good. I have to pick that up.
Yeah, it's a real short interview, but he does mention having read the book.
Well, and also, you know, that the Dacre is going to do his Stoker on Stoker presentation. We're putting that together as a program in October. And I think it's actually on our website, and maybe I should have mentioned it already, although I don't know if tickets registration is live yet. But I will certainly contact everybody when that presentation goes live. But there's a book version of it you can get that he has put out there. So where are you? Well, first I've asked my friend Arminius of Budapest University, and this is and several of the annotated editions, like to identify this, person who it could have been, that Stoker's actually referring to a real life person. But I think for the purposes of the story, I'm really interested in, and because the detail there is that Van Helsing has a colleague who does like vampire research. So there's another person that does this, and he's particularly, Van Helsing particularly asked him to make a record of the things that he has been discovering. So maybe this is who he's visiting, well, actually he's at Budapest University, so he's not visiting him in Amsterdam. But he has another colleague here. And then we get the biggest link for the people who want to argue that, the scholars who want to argue that Dracula is Vlad Tepes, that he is, the Vlad the Impaler Dracula is actually this Dracula, because he says Van Helsing says he must indeed have been that voivode Dracula who won his name against the Turk over the great river on the very frontier of Turkey land. I think that's Turkey land. It used to be Turkey land. Now we've just dropped the land because Turkey land sounds funny. Turkey doesn't sound funny. Turkey land sounds funny. So that sounds like a land of turkeys. So I'm glad they've dropped the land, or we dropped the land in the West. But he mentions the land beyond the forest, which I think is almost like a hint that, like, I'm talking about the Emily Gerard book, that I took this from. Like, why would that land beyond the forest phrase hit there if, like, surely Stoker's thinking of the book itself. But the Draculas were, says Arminius, a great noble race. And now he's back into the general Draculas. And then they, though now and again were scions who were held by their coevals to have dealings with the evil one. They learned his secrets in the Scholomance. So they learned the secrets of the evil one in the Scholomance among the mountains over Lake Hermannstadt, where the devil claims the 10th scholar as his due.
When I used to write in college, I outlined out a story that I never completed, and I'm throwing this out there for anybody that wants to complete it. It was essentially Dracula at the Scholomance with an ancestor of Van Helsing as one of his fellow students. And it landed up being, they were friends, and it landed up being a screw up of the Van Helsing ancestor that caused Dracula to be kept.
That's a good idea for a story. I like that.
I thought so, but I wasn't talented enough to finish it. So.
I just like the possibilities of like a Hogwarts crossover, where like we can write fan fiction where it's Harry Potter and Hogwarts and all those kids battling the Scholomance. So, that's like,
that would be great. I didn't even thought of that.
So, that's the one I want. But I like the idea of Dracula showing up at the Scholomance, like, with his books under his arm, like, hey, I'm ready. I'm ready to learn necromancy. And he does.
I had it almost, this was pre-historian, but it was almost like the historian where all the students kept getting like secret messages that they had to find it before they were accepted to it. It was, the idea was pretty cool in my head.
Cool. He also says in this paragraph, in one manuscript, this very Dracula is spoken of as Wampyr, Wampyr, which we all understand too well. Yeah, I'm thinking of manuscripts that he's spoken of as Wampyr, and that's Stoker's notes to Dracula, in which he was originally named Count Wampyr. And for me, reading that line's a meta joke. Stoker, like, yes, there are manuscripts. They were yours that had named him that way, named him that. And this detail at the end here, I really think is interesting. From the loins of this very one, great men and good women, and their graves make sacred the earth where alone this foulness can dwell. For it is not the least of its terrors that this evil thing is rooted deep in all good. In soil barren of holy memories, it cannot rest. So I've seen, I think there's some confusion over this line, because I've seen in some annotated editions, like, wait, so the soil that he rests in is holy? How does that work? And then how are they, then putting the host in it, making it whole? What I think what's going on here is that, correct me if I'm wrong, the soil that he's using to rest in is holy because it contains his ancestors. It is the great men, their graves had make the earth sacred. So it's sacred because it is the soil of his ancestors and his people, the same soil his ancestors were buried in. That's why it's holy. It's not actually consecrated, or if it is, it doesn't even matter, because the consecration for him that enables him to rest is it because it's the same soil that his ancestors are buried in.
Well, I never took it out that specifically, but I did always interpret it as his ancestral land.
Yeah. So that's what the soil is, and that's why he needs it. So, and clearly he can rest in other places. He rests in the suicide's grave in Whitby, and Van Helsing even mentions that at some point in this chapter. But I guess, like, to truly rest, to really, get a good day's sleep, he needs to be in the soil of his ancestors, and that strengthens him in a way. So, and now we get to where Quincy almost kills someone, because he goes out of the room, and they notice, like, Quincy's looking out the window, and then he goes out of the room, and they pause, but then Professor goes on. We haven't here much data. We must proceed to lay out our campaign. This is the campaign diary, after all. And then here they were interrupted by a pistol shot. The glass of the window was shattered with a bullet, which, ricocheting from the top of the embrasure, struck the far wall of the room. I am afraid, and then Mina says, I am afraid I am at heart a coward, for I shrieked out. You're not a coward if you shriek out when somebody fires a bullet through a window.
This gives the conspiracy theorist the fodder to say that Quincy's in league with Dracula.
Yes. So
the theory is that he was actually taking a shot at Van Helsing.
And he's taking a shot at somebody. Like, you don't fire into a room where there's people. Like, oh, I was trying to hit the bat, and he missed anyway. But Quincy comes back in and says, what? Like, I'm sorry, I almost killed somebody. There was a big bat on the windowsill, and I went out to have a shot, as I have been doing of late of evenings, whenever I have seen one. So this is his new hobby. I'm going to go out. I'm going to walk around the building and shoot at bats. Just try not to shoot at the building itself, Quincy. So at least he's not like Buffalo Bill sharpshooter, like, when he can hit anything. Excuse me. Well, if he was, he just would have hit the bat. He thinks he is, I guess. And he just instead fires through the window. And the bat is Dracula. We know that. As readers, we know that. Van Helsing especially should know that. He just said Dracula can turn into a bat. He knows that a bat has been around Lucy's window at night, and that's been a problem. And now there's a bat outside this window. And this should be the moment where they all say, like, oh shit, Dracula just heard everything we said. Because he did. He was outside the window listening to all of your plans so far. So even if you haven't given away, like, what you're next doing, like you're going to go to Carfax, he knows that you're going to go to Carfax because he knows he's there. And, he's been listening to you give this lecture about all of his powers. So, but Van Helsing doesn't do that. He's just gets right to business. And this is the plan of action. We must trace each of these boxes, and when we are ready, we must either capture or kill this monster in his lair, sterilize the earth so no more he can seek safety in it, and we may in the end, we may find him in his form of man between the hours of noon and sunset. So engage with him when he is at his most weak. And this is what they need to do. This is the plan of action for how they're going to pursue him. And then he follows it immediately with, and now for you, Madam Mina, this night is the end until all be well. You are too precious for us to have such risk. When we part tonight, you no more must question. We shall tell you all in good time. Oh, what a dick. That is like the word. It didn't strike me as that the first time. What an awful, we shall tell you all in good time. We are men and are able to bear, but you must be our star and our hope. And we shall act all the more free that you are not in the danger such as we are. Yeah, that's not a nice way to shut her out at all. Mina knows it, right? She says, though it was a bitter pill for me to swallow. Like, you know, she's like, okay, you know, these brave men are keeping me safe. I get that, but it's a bitter pill for her to swallow. And she says, I could say nothing save to accept their chivalrous care of me. I like how that easily can be read sarcastically if you want to read it that way.
Oh, she gets even better in a second.
So,
man-like, they have told me to go to bed and sleep.
oh my God. You know, this, you know, she does confirm their, you know, she affirms her role as a weak female, which I find to be, sorry. Got to take the phone out of the room before we started today. She affirms her role as a weak female, which I find very, you know, disturbing in this chapter. But I've found that before, that Stoker has to keep having her affirm that, so I think it's not to be a threat to the other men around here. So she does that, and then, you know, they send her off to bed, and, you know, as if a woman can sleep when those she loves are in danger. I don't know, as if Jonathan could sleep when he was in danger. Like, it's got nothing to do. And we as readers, we've seen that over and over, how the men react to these dangerous situations, and Jonathan especially, and how it's got nothing to do with your gender, obviously, not even in this book, that how you react. So, but they send her off to bed, and she'll be in danger because of it. And we get hints at it here of what's going to happen with Renfield, because right away they are going to, Renfield asks if he'll see them. Now, this is odd. The time of this diary entry. Dr. Seward's diary. It's 1 October, 4 a.m. And so I assume that what happens is that's when the time is on it that he's written about it. So everything that you're going to read is probably before then, like, because if they all met at 8 o'clock, Seward said it was going to be 9, and then they actually met at 8 after dinner for their meeting. Their meeting didn't take until 4 a.m., obviously, you know, before they go and see Renfield. So they must have gone to see Dracula, you know, to explore the Carfax and see if the boxes are there before then. But that's problematic, because actually the next chapter, the Seward's diary is headed 1 October, 5 a.m. And so they're visiting. So I think Stoker just had it confused, that like they visit Renfield at 4 a.m. and then they go right to the house, Carfax, and then he comes back and writes the diary entry about that. But it's problematic, because it shouldn't be 4 a.m. This should be like 10 o'clock at night or something. So so I don't know what more to make of the time there, but next week maybe I'll have figured that out.
I just assumed that he was writing about it the next morning.
Yes, but then the next chapter is 5 a.m. after, like, so there's a break, and then he writes more. So I don't understand what.
That's Jonathan's chapter at 5 a.m. Seward's chapter, the next chapter.
Yes, but the time then maybe that is how it works then. We just don't get his account. But this chapter ends like we're going to go to the place. So, well, maybe that's the solution. I'll have it figured out by next week. Renfield wants to see him, and boy, he just sounds annoyed, right? Like, you are the doctor here, right? Renfield wants to know if I see him, as if as he had something of the utmost importance to tell me. And I asked the others to wait a few minutes for me as I had to go see my patient. And it's patient in quotation marks. Like what is, yeah, oh, you mean your pet lunatic? Is that who you mean? So he seems really annoyed that he has to go tend to his patient, this poor insane man in your asylum who you refuse to treat.
But I think I've asked this before. If Seward's diary is kept in phonograph, who's putting those marks in?
So when Mina was typing it up, she's like, "Oh, he means patient in quotation." She interpreted it that way. She heard his voice say, "I have to go see my patient." And by his tone of voice, she knew to put it in quotation marks. And then they all want to go. "Take me with you, friend John. May I come also?" "Me too. May I come?" said Harker. It's like, hey, let's all go visit the lunatic party. That's what we're all, let's all go meet the lunatic. And they do. And as soon as they get there, Renfield is acting completely sane. We found him in a state of considerable excitement, but far more rational in his speech and manner than I had ever seen him. There was an unusual understanding of himself, which was unlike anything I had ever met with in a lunatic. And we took it for granted that his reasons would prevail with others entirely sane. He took it for granted. So he says, "I'm going to appeal to you guys, that, you know, if your friends here would not mind sitting in judgment on my case, that I'm going to prove that I'm sane." And we've seen this in the notes too, that that Stoker has this test of sanity that he wants to have. And in his original notes, it's with Dracula. That Dracula is a visitor to the asylum, and he deals with Renfield, and he proves that he's sane. And that whole idea is dropped and taken out of the novel. But this is an idea so what he's turned it into instead is just a plea from Renfield for these men to say that he is sane. And then Seward and he has a certain dignity in the man's manner, so much of the habit of equality. Oh, really? Oh, really, Jack? That Renfield, you're equal? You're just noticing that? And he introduces everyone: Lord Gadoming, Professor Van Helsing, Quincy Morris, Mr. Renfield. He shook hands with each of them. Did we forget someone? Where's Harker? Yeah. He's there. He said, "May I come?" And obviously Stoker forgot that Harker was supposed to be in this scene. But I like the idea that Jonathan's there anyway. He introduces everybody, and Jonathan's standing in the back like, hi. Like he's being ignored because he is definitely there. He mentions later in the next chapter in his diary entry how when we went to see Renfield, it's just that Stoker forgot to include him in the actual scene.
He's the ultimate cuck, right?
I know. It's like you've been working so hard to, redeem this character, and then you just forget that he's there. So he does, and then Renfield suddenly becomes like so loquacious and speaking, as this, very cultured gentleman. "Lord Gadoming, I have the honor of seconding your father at the Wyndham." And this is where he mentions that Lord Gadoming was the inventor of a burnt rum punch, which I have created my own here, but I'm naming it for Lord Gadoming, Lord Gadoming's burnt rum punch. And Quincy Morris, and he talks about Texas and American politics, and then Van Helsing, who has revolutionized therapeutics by his discovery of the continuous evolution of brain matter. So just the gobbledygook kind of, science there that Stoker's making up. Unless someone knows differently, I just think he's just making stuff up there. He's intelligent, he's cultured, he's connected.
So do you think he actually knows all this stuff, or this stuff's being fed by Dracula?
That's my question. That was literally my question in this. Or is it a kind of psychic power from Dracula? That's what I was going to ask you. What do you think?
I do think that Renfield is probably learned, but I do not think that he knows these specifics about these people.
Because it really hints at a long backstory, that like a big backstory, that I actually knew your father at a club, and I know these personal details.
I think that's that one is the most likely to be true. But I think all the other stuff he knows, it's very unlikely that he actually knows who Van Helsing is. It's very unlikely he knows anything about Quincy.
But then how would Dracula know all this? Like, does Dracula, can he just automatically know everything about people? Or doesn't he have to encounter them in some way? So
it's not obvious, but he does have some kind of psychic ability. And he does spend time hidden around those people, so
I think it's problematic.
He just did spend time hidden around them.
I think it's problematic, and on one hand, it hints at a long backstory for Renfield of who he may have been before he went insane, but also hints that because and as he'll make clear, that he's under Dracula's control, and there is a kind of psychic connection between them. So Dracula knows, because Dracula as a bat was just looking in the room, and he can kind of read their minds, maybe, and he knows everything about them already. And now Renfield is tapped into that as well. There's possibilities that are just interesting, and I really like that the questions aren't necessarily answered for us. But what we do have is Renfield is certainly deeper than Seward knows, and Seward is constantly surprised. And I felt under a strong impulse to tell him I was satisfied as to his sanity. You're either the worst, mental psychologist in the world, or you are, you're just not understanding what has been in front. Like, you're just demonstrating that we don't know what's going on with Renfield. So, but it's a good thing. Well, it's not a good thing. Seward says, I thought it better to wait, however, before making so grave a statement. For of old I knew the sudden changes to which the particular patient was liable. And then Renfield really starts pleading. I desire to go at once, here, now, this very hour, this very moment, if I may. And Seward won't let him out. And then he pleads, I am content to implore in such a case, not on personal grounds, but for the sake of others. I am not at liberty to give you the whole of my reasons, but you may, I assure you, take it from me that they are good ones, sound and unselfish, and spring from the highest sense of duty. Could you look, sir, into my heart, you would approve to the full the sentiments which animate me, nay, more, you would count me amongst the best and truest of your friends. And Seward says, no. He just, it's not surprising that he's just not going to have one conversation with my, patient and suddenly let you free. But, as readers of the book, you can really, see that it's just, it's easy for us to see that, oh, something's going on here and you should listen to him.
You just dropped out for me, Ed. Uh-oh.
Can you hear me now?
I can now.
Good. Yeah. All right. Yeah, it just dropped out for a second there. I had to fix it. Sorry. And then Van Helsing jumps in and says, oh, I'll make a deal with you. If you can satisfy me, if you can answer me, why you want to be free, tell me the truth. I'll I'll make sure that you're out of here. And Renfield's response is what? I have nothing to say. Your argument is complete, and if I were free to speak, I should not hesitate a moment, but I am not my own master in the matter. I can only ask you to trust me. If I am refused, the responsibility does not rest with me. He's under Dracula's control, we assume, but I love how there's a hint here of Polidori's vampire story, isn't there? Because in that story, Lord Riven makes Aubrey promise that you won't reveal my secret that until a year has passed, and then meets him again before the year is up, and Lord Riven is preying upon Aubrey's sister, and he's going to marry her. And Aubrey knows that he's a vampire, but because he made the promise, he can't tell everyone. And then it seems like he's insane that he can't tell, because he just goes crazy, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, you're crazy. There's something wrong with you. And it's the promise that he's make that he can't reveal until that year is up. And I love all the little parallels of that to this situation, that Renfield is insane and he can't tell them why that he's asking this question, just as Aubrey in that Polidori story of the vampire was. So and then he pleads. He held up his hands imploringly. He gets down on his knees and he begs, tears rolling down his cheeks. And then he says, this is fascinating, send me away how you will and where you will. Send keepers with me with whips and chains. Let them take me in a straight waistcoat, manacled and leg ironed. You don't know what you do by keeping me here. You don't know whom you wrong or how, and I may not tell. Woe is me, I may not tell. And then finishes that, can't you hear me, man? Can't you understand? Will you never learn? Don't you know that I am sane and earnest now, that I am no lunatic in a mad fit, but a sane man fighting for his soul? And he's even telling him, lock me up somewhere else. And that's fine. And Seward won't agree to anything. And that's the best case that Renfield makes, right?
Yep.
He's like, just ship me somewhere else. Send me to another asylum. Put me in a straitjacket, chain me up, send me somewhere. I'll do it. But the warning there, you don't know what you do by keeping me here. You don't know whom you wrong or how. And that's the big hint, because his plea of freedom is for the sake of others, Renfield's making, because he knows Dracula's plan to attack Mina. Like, big spoiler, that's what's going on here. And actually, if this is 4 a.m.,
he's already done it.
It's or it's still happening. Dracula's literally preying upon Mina while Renfield's trying to get them out. But if it's much earlier, if it's not 4 a.m., see, this is early. This is just because that's supposed to be just after their meeting and they're going to go to the thing. So we assume that Dracula gets into the asylum because Renfield invites him in. So this whole plea and him getting him out of there could mean that I haven't invited him in yet, but when he comes back, he's going to ask me and I have to say yes. So this really could be a crux of the plot. And this is something that we can talk about later, but this is the setup. And as we're really annotating this, and this is why I have to give the spoiler, because that has everything to do with what's going on right now, is that Renfield knows that Dracula is going to come into the asylum and attack Mina. And is it because he knows he's going to do it, or does he even know he's there now and he's trying to escape? It says a lot about Renfield to know whether or not he's just trying to escape himself or he's really trying to prevent Dracula from attacking Mina. So,
well, I fall on the prevention side, and I like how hard he tries here to save her. Makes it so much more tragic what happens to him later.
Yeah.
Whereas he was a quirky but likable character up till now, and now he's just a likable character, and it's just going to be awful what happens to him.
Before we finish, there were a couple questions. Holly asked if the Mark Gatiss appearance will be recorded. It will. The David Scowl show was recorded as well, and I just don't know when we're going to post that yet. And Rick asked a question about that Scowl made a joke about herd immunity, but seriously, why doesn't the number of vampires expand exponentially? That is something I'm definitely want to tackle in one of the future episodes here. And Adrian writes that in some recent manga or novel, Renfield has become a common name to describe the vampire blood slave. Like, oh, he's a Renfield. It is the case in the manga Blood Alone and Jim Butcher's Blood Rights, etc., that people are called Renfields now. That I think I've seen that in something, and I can't remember what it was, that they're called Renfields. But this Renfield's trying to be a hero, right? He's trying to not have Dracula attack any more people that, but he is enslaved to him in some way. And and Seward will have none of it. Come, I said sternly, no more of this. We have had quite enough already. Get to your bed and try to behave more discreetly. Just as treating him as a child, right? I mean, that's right out of the, I've said that to my kids, sorry. I mean, it's happened. That is exactly what you say to children when you're angry and you're trying to be stern and you want them to go to bed. And this is the problem of, Seward as, as a doctor, is that he just doesn't treat his patient, as definitely not Renfield, with any respect at all. And Renfield just goes over and lies down, collapses on the bed. But then when I was leaving the room, last of our party, he said to me in a quiet, well-bred voice, "You will, I trust, Dr. Seward, do me the justice to bear in mind later on that I did what I could to convince you tonight." So, twist a little knife there, Renfield, because Seward deserves it. Yeah, it's, they're going to regret this. There's, just as Van Helsing never regrets, but should regret shutting Mina out of their plans, because that comes back to haunt them in more ways than one. But Seward needs to lament that he just didn't listen to, you've never listened to Renfield. And when are you going to learn? You should start listening to Renfield. So. Any final thoughts on this chapter?
No, I just love that last. He might as well have just said, "Don't say I didn't warn you." Yeah. I've been telling you the whole time.
And they know that about him too now. They know that he's connected to Dracula.
Yeah. They just figured it out. It's not like it's new information or it's old information. It's they would have forgotten. It's new. They know it.
Well, poor Renfield and poor everyone else. So that's it for today, Dracuphiles. Thank you for tuning in today. We will post this recording on our website, or maybe that's how you're watching it right now. Thank you. And we have a Sundays with Dracula Facebook group where we can continue the conversation. There's been so many posts on it lately. I literally haven't been able to keep up. And thank you all for posting. And I have to go up and read a whole bunch of posts that I haven't even been able to get to.
My favorite part of the day is going through the Facebook page.
Yeah, there's a lot on it. It's a great audience we have. I thank you all so much. So if you're not already on Facebook watching this maybe for the first time, look us up on Facebook, join in that conversation. I'm also always available to answer questions via email at epettit@rosenbach.org. Next week's co-host joining me will be horror theater maker Josh Hitchens. I can't wait for that. And don't forget, everyone, to join me tomorrow night for Monday Drac Chat with Dracuphile Carrie Millsap Spears. Hi, Carrie. I'm assuming you're in the audience today. Remember to register for it ahead of time. That it's members of Dracula Club only. You can only watch it on Zoom as it airs at 6:30 p.m. EDT. We will not post the show after the airing. If you're looking for more virtual engagement, head on over to the Rosenbach website page. You will find some new courses posted there, some other programs. Our garden will be open soon. You can register and come see. Check out all the virtual offerings we have. And if you just want to make a donation, that would be great. There's a support tab there. You can click that. You can go in and you can make a donation. If you do, I would be more grateful than the headmaster of the school of Mance when Dracula showed up on the first day of school. So, best student ever. Tucker, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Ed.
Thanks for your music. I love it. I'm gonna use Ritual in the Blood Room to play us out again today. We'll go back to Storm into Whitby next week because I miss it and I need to use that one too. So join us next week, everyone, on Sundays with Dracula for chapter 19, when our vampire hunting team battles hordes of rats, and they also continue to protect Mina. Once again, here's Tucker's great song. Thank you all. Farewell, everyone, and in the words of our friend Dracula, go safely and leave something of the happiness you bring. Bye-bye.